status quo wants to remain, because by definition, that is what it does. And to quote the Prince by Machiavelli, and to paraphrase it, there's nothing more difficult to achieve than to make fundamental change in the order of things. Because the people who benefit from the old order resist what you're trying to do. And those that would benefit by the new order don't believe that you could make the change. And therefore, they are not on board with you while you're trying to do. So it's a very lonely place to be trying to effect change in any major system. And it's the same for the whole structure of our economies in the Caribbean and our energy situation, where more than 90% of our electricity is generated from oil and gas. So that transition is not an easy one.
Thank you again, Mr. Baldeosingh, for agreeing to speak with us today on the Caribbean Climate Calabash podcast. This is one of Climate Tracker's avenues of trying to spread the story and the message of climate change from our region's perspective, which I think needs to go out there so much more. And we're very happy to have you, and we appreciate so much your time, Mr. Baldeosingh, who is the CEO of the Carbon Zero Institute of Trinidad and Tobago. I'd like to first start off with your journey with this company, how you came to found it, what were some of your motivations, and maybe some of the challenges that you encountered along the way.
Well, thanks very much, Gladstone. I am delighted to participate in your podcast and to support your efforts and your good work with spreading this message about climate change in the Caribbean and what we need to do about it. I'm an electrical engineer, having studied at the University of the West Indies at the undergraduate and the master's level in electrical engineering. And I spent my career in the power, oil, and gas industries, all of which contribute to a better quality of life, but also contribute to a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. I had a stint as chairman of Trinidad and Tobago's national oil company, Petrotrin, which is a really important contributor to the economy over the many years. And the company had existed in earlier forms for more than 100 years. So this is 100 years of producing carbon. While there, I took a very strong environmental focus, and in 2020 established the Caribbean Center for Climate Change at the refinery. In other words, we as the oil company wanted to better understand climate change, how we were contributing to it, and what we need to do for the future. So also in 2007, I arranged a conference and chaired it on carbon trading, because I felt that as a region, we needed to understand where the opportunities were in carbon trading and how can we, in a proactive way, address our carbon emissions. Both of those things were too much ahead of their time, and they did not get enough traction in the early stages. So only in 2015, after the Paris Agreement, I decided to go all the way and started the Carbon Zero Initiative of Trinidad and Tobago, it was called at the time, and started projects with corporations and schools and other organizations that wanted to understand climate change and understand what they could do about it. And later on, we changed the name to the Carbon Zero Institute of Trinidad and Tobago to focus more on the research aspects of it and to partner more internationally with like-minded persons and organizations who want to join with us in the Caribbean in our fight against climate change. The Caribbean, as you know, is made up of small island developing states, or CZITTs, and actually the Caribbean represents the majority of CZITTs in the world. And therefore, we are kind of a special case where we experience some of the worst effects of climate change, with sea level rise, with saltwater incursions, loss of agricultural land, loss of fisheries output, with ocean temperature rise, and so many of these negative aspects of climate change. In my opinion, we needed to first understand what climate change means to us, need to do about it, and to better understand where that we can tap into to address the effects of climate change, but also in the process, develop a more sustainable economy for the region that can now transition at the same time that we address the climate change. We transition our economies to be more resilient and more sustainable in the longer term. So we started up this non-profit organization in 2016, and we were really thrilled when our president of Trinidad and Tobago, His Excellency Justice Anthony Carmona, took interest in our work and became our patron after he demitted office, but not before going to the United Nations Environmental Assembly in Nairobi and speaking about the work we were doing as Carbon Zero Institute. Incidentally, CZITT, the Carbon Zero Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, we pronounce it CZITT, as in take hold of it, CZITT. And we encourage people to seize the opportunity to take some action. Now, these days, we do a lot of work with the secondary schools, projects that teach them about solar power and about sustainable food production, about energy conservation and water conservation. We have the National Secondary Schools Climate Quiz, which has completed 2 seasons and it's now in its 3rd season. And we have almost 150 schools taking part in this. And we produce 8 one-hour broadcasts that is shown on television in Trinidad and Tobago. And then in 28 Caribbean countries, along with metropolitan areas in the eastern US, such as Miami, Atlanta, New York, and Washington, D.C., so that we are getting this Caribbean flavored message out into a wider region and an interested population. As a COVID response, we set up an e-learning platform, produced 500 teaching videos on this topic of education for sustainable development. And now that is in use across the Caribbean. We've had more than 10,000 students benefiting from it, about half of which are from Trinidad and Tobago, but the next highest is Jamaica, and then Barbados and Guyana and so on. They're all students from all of these territories are using our platform, learning about their academic content and at the same time, sustainability issues. So that's what we're about. We have another project I would like to mention, which is that we're working with farmers because food production is critical, and combining this idea of carbon sequestration with the agricultural output, so that we are calculating how much carbon is sequestered in the agricultural plot and getting organizations, particularly in the energy sector, to help sponsor the farmers and therefore reduce the carbon and take an informal carbon offset from it. With that, we are working with farmers on new and innovative ways to to be successful in the face of climate change, and to use artificial intelligence to help guide them in their farming activities. I've said a lot. I want to take a pause because you probably have some questions now for me.
Yeah, definitely. Out of what you said, I can pull a couple of things. I want to start. You said that initially when you started, you implemented two things, even as your stint as chairman, and then after that, that were kind of before their time and didn't get as much traction. Um, for one, I want to talk about the oil and gas industry. I want to get kind of your perspective on it, but I want to take it from this angle of, seeing it as something that we're already involved. This thing is already a part of our lives, a part of the economy. How can we think about understanding better what we're doing and finding a sustainable way to move forward? Um, how did like describe some of the challenges you had even setting up things like this while at a oil and gas company?
Well, the oil and gas industry is very procedural, very regimented, doesn't like change ordinarily. It's made up of a sort of a command and control structure. So it's like a huge oil tanker, to use the analogy, where you're trying to turn this tanker. The tanker doesn't want to turn. It takes a huge amount of effort. But it also, in this case, takes strategy, because Petrotrin, when I met it, it was a failing company. It was not fulfilling its business mandate, not properly fulfilling its social mandate. It was losing money. The staff was unhappy. We were losing qualified staff all the time. The industrial relations climate was bad, and it was not looking for new business outside of Trinidad and Tobago, and it was not looking to clean up its environmental aspects. So I jumped in. I was 34 years old, so I was full of energy and belief that we could make change, and I went into it with that confidence, and also by quickly realizing that things were so bad that you almost couldn't spoil it anymore. So I set about a transformation of the company, where there was more focus on performance and performance management. There was a restructuring. We also paid closer attention to industrial relations and completed all our industrial relations agreements with the trade unions. We engaged with the trade unions and got them on board. And on the environmental side, we sent out a message that there would be zero tolerance for environmental impacts on the environment, negative impacts. And when there was the first oil spill, we took serious action. It resulted in the manager being terminated and all the supervisors and so on involved being suspended for some time. And you know what? There was not another major environmental incident in the 5 years that I was there, because we showed that we were serious about the environment. So the challenges in any established operation is that status quo is a very strong thing, and it wants to secure itself. Status quo wants to remain, because by definition, that is what it does. And to quote the Prince by Machiavelli, and to paraphrase it, there's nothing more difficult to achieve than to make fundamental change in the order of things, because the people who benefit from the old order resist what you're trying to do, and those that would benefit by the new order don't believe that you could make the change. And therefore, they are not on board with you while you're trying to do. So it's a very lonely place to be trying to effect change in any major system. And it's the same for the whole structure of our economies in the Caribbean and our energy situation, where more than 90% of our electricity is generated from oil and gas, and where we're preaching about renewable energy, but continuing to build more infrastructure around oil and gas. So that transition is not an easy one. It's very difficult to convince the people who are involved in the oil and gas industry that they need to change. But it's happening globally. It's not just a local or regional issue anymore. And the landscape in Trinidad and Tobago, as it is in Guyana and Suriname, is made up of multinational companies exploiting the oil and gas resources to produce products and to deliver benefits in the areas of job creation, taxes, and royalties, and so on to the governments and the countries.
Interesting.
Yes, so it's a very heavily established structure, and it's a structure that has delivered benefits. I have to keep saying that because we can say we're knocking the oil companies because they're producing the carbon, but they're also producing the way of life that we have. And Trinidad and Tobago is a mature oil and gas environment. But Guyana is a very new territory for oil and gas, or mostly oil. Suriname has been producing oil for some time, but it's now going to take off, very similar to Guyana. It's hard to tell people in countries that have been poor and have been suffering for a long time that they should not fully explore and exploit the natural resources that they have in terms of hydrocarbon. It's not an easy thing to say. And the idea is that we cannot look at somebody who is drowning and tell them about building a boat or a ship or a fishing vessel. We first have to hand them a lifeline. We first have to make them comfortable. And then we could talk about, okay, now let's build a nice boat that we will be in. So we have to understand, sorry?
No, go ahead.
We have to understand where we're coming from to fully establish where we're going to. Now, we do not have the benefit of time. If we thought we did in the past, we don't anymore. So here we are with the world having a target of we have to be carbon zero by the year 2050 to avoid the worst effects of climate change. And at the same time, Trinidad and Tobago cannot imagine life without gas or without some amount of oil. And Guyana cannot imagine a future that does not have oil, since they are now seeing what plentiful oil is able to do for the economy. Guyana is the second fastest growing economy in the world at this moment, and all of the eyes are on the country. So, and it's very similar with Suriname. Suriname is going to take off in the same way, as I mentioned. So, what we need to do, we need to have more cooperation with Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Suriname. First of all, to share the lessons, because we understand this whole business. But also, even as we are building these economies based on hydrocarbon, we have to be planning for no hydrocarbon. So I delivered a public lecture in Guyana some years ago, and I said the window of opportunity for Guyana in terms of oil and gas is closing even as it is opening. And that is what we have to recognize. And we have to recognize that the window of opportunity in Trinidad and Tobago is definitely closing. And it's closing because of two factors. One, the world is losing its appetite for hydrocarbon. And secondly, our reserves are falling off at the same time. And they are dwindling really quickly. So all the indications are that we need to now transition. This economy here in Trinidad and Tobago transitioned over the last more than 100 years from cocoa and coffee into sugar, into oil, into gas. But none of that happened because you shut off one and you started up another one. It's because it was like a relay match, a relay sprint, where one is slowing down while the other is taking off. And we have to define a new economy for Trinidad and Tobago, and also by extension, the entire region that does not depend on oil and gas for its sustainability.
Yeah, very interesting. And before I move on to the next question, I just wanted to ask, from your perspective, to as someone who's not only worked in it and has experience, but someone who's educated and has expertise in the field, what do you think that transition looks like in terms of logistics? Because I know you mentioned one, we don't have much time, but also, as you said, the industry is like this huge oil tanker that's very difficult to turn. It's very difficult to kind of, and I'm sure there's so many parts in it in terms of how it works. So we don't have much time, and it's something that we need to get turning. What do you think the logistics looks like? Because I know you said it also has to be a comfortable transition. So what do you think that's looking like in terms of, especially the time that we have to?
Right. So the longer we wait, the less comfortable it's going to be. So we need to be actively establishing a new basis for the economy. And to do that, we need to look at what do we have. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a very high level of education, a very high literacy rate, and therefore lots of graduates who are underemployed at the moment. We have infrastructure, physical infrastructure. We have IT infrastructure. So we need to start looking at how all these things can work for us and establish the knowledge industry, establish all the other activities we can around manufacturing and services that can create the level of employment we need and the revenue streams that the country needs. We can take the same oil infrastructure in terms of the gas infrastructure at Point Lisas and turn that around, because we have something like 10 world-scale ammonia plants in Point Lisas in Trinidad, and they use natural gas as the feedstock or the raw material, and they use natural gas as the energy source. So for the energy source, we need to convert them to renewable energy very quickly. So that now cuts down how much natural gas you're going to use. And then as the feedstock, we need to move to green hydrogen to the extent that it is viable, which means doing some quick calculations to see how this thing could work. And the whole green hydrogen industry has a huge amount of promise if it can work economically for the country, because the same plants that are producing the ammonia based on natural gas can produce ammonia based on hydrogen that's not coming from natural gas. That's coming from the electrolysis of water. And the power that you need for the electrolysis process must come from renewable energy. So it needs people to get together who can contribute to this whole process, doing their different parts to work out how this thing could work for the future, and then start a pilot project right away to test the concept. I think that and Trinidad and Tobago really needs to use its very educated workforce to more income generating activities around artificial intelligence, around the knowledge economy, and using the last window of natural gas that we have to create the future that we need to create. Now, it's different in Guyana and in Suriname. So in Guyana, they have a better model to work because they are rich in other natural resources that are not related to oil and gas. They have minerals, bauxite, gold, diamonds, all kinds of exotic minerals that the world needs now for electric vehicles and so on. They have hydroelectric power capacity, and they have solar and wind power capabilities as well that are all undeveloped. So in parallel with building their oil industry, they can be building a non-oil industry that's unparalleled and that is able to pick up and take off while the oil industry is going to drop off. And something similar can be done in Suriname. And in partnership with Trinidad and Tobago, where there's money for investment along with technical expertise, we can come up with a solution that works for the three countries, Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, and Tobago, cooperating around sustainability. And that could be a pole, the southern pole of the Caribbean, that helps to push technology, renewable energy, and so on up the island chain, including, which is, you may know is another of my projects, the development of an integrated power system in the region that allows different people to produce renewable energy and sell to others in the region.
Yes, very interesting. Well, the time is running now, but if anything, we can jump back on the same link after if the time runs out. Have like two more questions. Education, you mentioned that was one of the things you mentioned initially. Most times when we think about solutions, we don't really think about education as a part of it, but it's a huge part of what you guys are doing. Why do you think that that's important? I know it has a lot of, I mean, behavior changing is easier with younger children. But what are some of your I guess, philosophies or motivations behind the educational programs that you have?
Well, I think about when some time ago I was in school, and in later life, I spoke to the principal of the university, and I said, you know, I learned so many things on a technical basis. And when I went out into the real world and into the industry, I could have tripped over the piece of equipment that I know how to draw and analyze and calculate, and I wouldn't recognize it in the real world. And that is because, and he apologized, he said that he knows that traditionally the university has had a disconnect with the real world. And it's the same at the secondary school level. We are teaching the young people things that they cannot relate to real life. They are only relating it to those past paper questions that they are trying to solve so that when they go into the exam, they can answer the questions and get a good grade and hopefully get a scholarship and so on. We have to approach it differently because young people now are much better informed about real world situations. they are more interested in being involved in it, and they're less interested in the old mundane education system that tried to make them learn off something and regurgitate it later on in the exam. They want to be part of the picture. They want to be part of the solution. And they need to be, because in 2050, the students who are now in secondary schools are going to be in mid-career, they're going to be parents, and they're going to be in a different world, not the one that we saw or our parents saw. We need to prepare them for that. And we need to let them understand that there are things that they could do, even now, by making the change in their own lives and in their homes and with people that they can influence, and to prepare to live differently to what we are teaching them when we show them that we throw things out the window and we leave the lights on and we pay for water while letting rainwater go down in the drain and cause flooding. So we need to show them practical things they can do and get them comfortable doing them. Let them stop using plastics. Let them understand that you need to use the more environmentally friendly products, including things like the gases you use in your air conditioning because of ozone depletion. So we need to connect life to the environmental impacts and to climate change and get them into a state where they understand this urgency better and are going to be part of it. And we have found that the students want to be that way. They just have been left out. They don't have a seat at the table because the older folks who have a stake in the past are the ones sitting at the table. And they who have a stake in the future are not at the table. They're not there part of the discussions. So we at CZITT are continuously bringing them into the picture, explaining what's happening, and helping them to understand the changes we could make. They will soon be in decision-making positions in businesses and so on. And if they carry this knowledge that we're imparting to them onwards into their work life, we will be making the change in a more systemic way.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I always find that, that aspect of it is, there's so much, there's a lot of dimension to it, because for many reasons, education is important. And I know it's important for CZITT, and you mentioned in terms of even in your initial career, just to have that information or have more information, but being in a position of having information and knowing that it's important to share it as well, and to make sure that as many people have it as possible. And that's where a lot of the change can come from too.
Yes.
All right, so you mentioned your another project you guys are working on, that has to do with food production and carbon offsets, assisting farmers in getting funding through that kind of exchange with larger companies. Could you talk a bit about that, and also talk a bit about what you guys are doing with that, but also your perspective of the carbon offset market and how it could help countries like ours?
Right. So, of course, we have many challenges. But one of the very important ones is food security. If we thought we could buy our way out of it, that is disappearing now, because we have seen that with the coming of war and with the COVID-19 pandemic, how it could disrupt the supply chains and how it could disrupt the agriculture output, the food available to be imported. Add climate change to that, and we have a seriously unsustainable situation with regard to feeding ourselves. But the really surprising and worrying thing is we are in an environment where food production is easier than in some parts of the world where we are importing foodstuff from, because we have summertime all year round. We have fertile soil, we have arable land, and we have manpower that have a history of producing from this arable land. Whether we're talking about food crops or livestock rearing, or whether we're talking about some more exotic things like honey production from bees or fish farming on land. We have a lot of capability to make these things happen. So what we at CZITT have been doing is examining what is preventing it and trying to address those things. So some of them are outside of our control, like, for example, Pradia larceny. Farmers are planting, but somebody else is reaping. That needs to be addressed. Agricultural access roads, where some of it is so bad that the farmers have great difficulty bringing the crops out. But then there are things that we can do something about, which is how we go about our agricultural production and how we are sticking to the tradition even in the face of climate change. Now we have extremes of weather. We have long dry spells, and then we have very short, extremely wet spells during which you can now have flooding events. So we have to manage that, and then we have new pests that are emerging out of climate change. So all of this is happening at a time when we need to not just keep our agricultural output stable, but in fact improve on it, reduce costs and increase output. What does it do for us? It gives us food security. It reduces our import bill and the need for hard currencies. It creates exportable products, and it creates healthier food for our people. So on that topic, we have been promoting the planting of moringa trees. Moringa is a tree that grows very quickly, which means it absorbs a lot more carbon than the average tree. But it has a health food product that is good for us, and it's good for export as well. So we are working with farmers to introduce the idea of planting moringa that gives them also shade in their garden. And that if they get an incentive in cash from the companies that want to offset their carbon emissions, that could be an incentive for them to keep the trees alive and to get the benefits of it. So we are developing a model, like a template that you can go in as a farmer and adjust the different aspects of it, like what you want to plant or rear. And it gives them a business plan that they can take to an agricultural development bank or even a private financer and say, this is my business plan. I would like you to invest in it or finance it. The part about the carbon offsets, well, we are working with the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine Engineering Institute to calculate how much carbon is sequestered in the agricultural plot. So it's almost a proven amount of carbon that we can show to somebody who wants to invest in it, and we declare the carbon offsets for them in an informal system. So CZITT is developing a carbon offset register that we can register the offset in a way that it can be measured and monitored and verified. And the company can pay for that and put it down in their reporting that we have generated so much carbon offsets from these agricultural activities that we have supported. So that's what we're doing, and we're working with the farmers on looking at unconventional things to aid their agricultural output. Things that they don't do generally, like drip irrigation is one. So there's a limited amount of water. Let's use it in the best and most efficient way. And to create a pond in the farm that you allow the rainwater to drain into, but you use the pond to have some fish farming. For example, the tilapia fish that loves these muddy ponds. So we are experimenting now with how we can have tilapia in the operation and have an additional revenue source. And to encourage beekeeping in the area, because we need the pollinators, and the honey can be another additional source of revenue to the farm. So we are combining all of this, and the latest thing now is to use an artificial intelligence app that we are developing that will advise the farmer on actions they should take based on the weather conditions and the market conditions and so on. So all of this we're bringing together as a technology-based solution to practical problems.
Very interesting. And, as you mentioned earlier too, the food issue, it's such a sensitive topic for us, because it's climate change throws a wrench completely into most of that. We depend on, I'm sure periodic larceny, as you mentioned, is a huge factor in trending down, because a lot of the Caribbean nations, I know Jamaica in particular, food production has trended down. Some of that is due to periodic larceny, but I definitely think that climate change throws a very big wrench into how much we can produce, and how sustainable the profession is becoming, because I've done a few reports where I've had to go and speak to farmers, and as you mentioned, to the supply chain issue, that's a big issue, because there are things that's so essential to farming livestock. There's feed, which without that, it's like farmers end up literally having to cut their livestock down and that kind of thing. So it really is, it's so easy for us, based on how we produce as well, to kind of have our kind of food stock just dwindle. So it is a huge issue. The carbon offset, or the carbon market topic is very interesting for us. You mentioned some things I've experienced with as well. Like the moringa is a huge key. At first time I'm hearing that one. So I'll have to do some research into it. But I know about mangroves, which kind of serve a similar purpose. But I do know that the moringa has these health benefits. I know about the products that can come from them. You're muted. I was saying you're muted.
I'm saying that Jamaica has an export industry around moringa already, and it's growing now. Trinidad and Tobago does not.
Yeah, definitely gonna have to look into that and see if there are any developing stories here about that. But that's interesting. And then you mentioned the apiculture, the bees too. That was a big key that I found, and I think that there's so many ways that we can see how, because the region that we live in, it's so, there's a huge web, a huge web containing other webs where everything is affected. And you mentioned, because I know climate change does affect the bees as well. The heat sometimes stresses them out and they struggle, but they are so key, because even a recent report that I did, I realized a similar it's a conservation project as well, and they are trying to find ways to provide additional livelihood for community members. Apiculture was a big one because, of course, they can sell the honey, but then the bees also increase the crop yield in the area.
Right.
Yeah, so it's such a huge.
It is an ecosystem, and we need to understand that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It is. It is. So you mentioned a lot there, and I'm sure it'll give our readers a lot to think about. I want to thank you so much again for your time.